Emily and her parents, the Johnsons, looked like any ordinary family from the outside: a smiling little girl, a quiet suburban house, and neighbors who waved hello. But behind those closed doors, Emily, just 4 years old, was slowly wasting away, trapped in a nightmare that no one could see, her tiny body dropping to a horrifying 21 pounds while her parents' secrets hid in plain sight. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, the Johnson house looked ordinary at first glance. Its white siding gleamed in the sunlight, the garden was neatly trimmed, and a small swing set sat in the backyard. Neighbors passed by on their morning walks, waving politely at Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, who always smiled and nodded in return. From the outside, the home gave no hint of the darkness hidden within. No one could have imagined that behind those closed doors, a little girl was slowly wasting away, trapped in a world of neglect and control. Emily Johnson was only 4 years old, but her life had already been defined by fear, isolation, and deprivation. Her small frame moved quietly through the house, her tiny hands barely reaching the kitchen counters. The house was a maze of clutter and shadows, filled with rooms that smelled faintly of decay and unwashed laundry. The walls, which should have echoed with laughter and play, seemed to absorb every sound, leaving only silence and the occasional creak of floorboards. Emily's world was small, constrained, and carefully monitored by her parents, who controlled every detail of her life. The neighborhood children often played together, laughing and running across lawns, but Emily was never among them. She would sometimes peek through the blinds at the kids outside, her eyes wide and longing, but the door remained closed, her parents insisting she stay inside. Teachers at her preschool noticed that she was unusually quiet, moving slowly and avoiding contact with other children. Her clothes hung loosely on her frail body, and her skin had a pallid, almost translucent quality. Even when she attended school, she seemed to carry a heavy exhaustion, as if her body could barely support her. Despite these visible signs, the warning signals went largely unnoticed. Her parents were adept at offering explanations. Emily was delicate, just picky with food or a slow eater. Visits to the doctor were brief and controlled, and the parents carefully framed her condition as a minor concern. Neighbors saw the family smiling together on rare occasions, enjoying the occasional barbecue or holiday gathering. On the surface, it appeared as though Emily was simply a quiet child, and no one suspected the extent of her suffering. Inside the house, the situation was far worse than anyone could have imagined. Emily's days were marked by strict routines dictated entirely by her parents. Meals were sparse and carefully rationed, often leaving her hungry and weak. She spent long hours alone in her room, with only a thin blanket for comfort and no toys or books to stimulate her mind. The world outside seemed distant and unreachable, and Emily's tiny body slowly deteriorated under the weight of neglect. Even when she tried to cry out for help, her voice barely rose above a whisper. The walls of the house seemed to swallow her words, leaving no trace for the outside world. Friends and family who once tried to intervene were pushed away or ignored, and the isolation became absolute. Every visitor who came close to noticing something wrong was met with calm, rehearsed explanations that deflected suspicion. Emily's reality was hidden in plain sight, a nightmare concealed behind the facade of normalcy. As the days turned into months, the toll on her body and spirit became more severe. Her tiny frame, which should have been full of energy and growth, was shrinking under the weight of prolonged starvation and neglect. The quiet suburban street continued its routines, unaware that behind one of the neat little houses, a young girl was slowly being forgotten. The horror of Emily's life was invisible to most, yet every passing day in that house brought her closer to a point from which she might not return. Emily's situation did not go entirely unnoticed, though the signs were subtle and easily dismissed. Teachers at her preschool had begun to grow concerned. They noticed how she moved through the classroom with a hesitant, almost fragile gait, keeping her distance from other children and rarely engaging in play. Her small hands fidgeted nervously with the hem of her shirt, and her eyes often wandered toward the window as if searching for an escape she could not reach. Each day, she seemed thinner, smaller, and weaker, yet every time the school raised questions with her parents, they brushed them off with carefully crafted explanations. Emily was just quiet, a delicate little girl, or slow to develop, and the adults in her life who might have intervened were reassured that nothing was wrong. Neighbors, too, had begun to sense that something was not right, though no one could quite put their finger on it. Late at night, faint sounds drifted through the wall's soft whimpers, the scuffle of small feet on hard floors, the occasional cry that was quickly muffled. Some assumed it was a normal child's restlessness or the sounds of siblings arguing, but those who paused and listened closely felt an unease they could not explain. Strange odors sometimes emanated from the house, subtle at first but growing stronger over time, like a mixture of spoiled food and neglect. Still, the Johnsons presented a polished exterior, greeting neighbors with smiles and small talk that masked the reality behind their front door. Even medical professionals had been misled. Emily had been taken to the doctor sporadically, and during each visit, her parents managed the interactions with precision. They controlled what the doctors could observe and carefully avoided questions that might reveal the full extent of her malnutrition. Routine checkups became exercises in deception, leaving only faint hints that something might be wrong. The little girl's cheeks were pale, her energy nearly non-existent, but any outward signs of serious illness were easily attributed to minor ailments. Inside the house, the signs of suffering were undeniable. Emily's meals were meager, often consisting of scraps or small portions of food that barely met her body's needs. She was monitored constantly, and any attempt to eat more than her parents allowed was swiftly punished or restricted. Her days were structured around strict rules that left little room for freedom or comfort. She spent hours alone in dimly lit rooms, sometimes sitting quietly on the floor, too weak to move or speak. Toys and books were almost non-existent, leaving her imagination and spirit starved alongside her body. The isolation was as damaging as the lack of food. Emily had no friends to turn to, no trusted adults who could intervene, and no way to escape the oppressive control her parents exercised. Her life was a series of confined spaces and long, silent hours. Even when she tried to reach out through her faint cries or fleeting gestures, her parents' dominance and manipulation ensured that no one outside the house took notice. Each day, the cycle of neglect tightened, and her frail body and mind became further trapped in the web her parents had woven. The neighborhood, meanwhile, remained largely unaware of the growing danger. Life continued on its surface, filled with routine, social gatherings, and the comforting illusion of normalcy. To anyone looking from the outside, the Johnsons were just another family, their house just another tidy home on a quiet street. The horrifying reality of Emily's slow deterioration was invisible, hidden behind layers of secrecy, deception, and fear, leaving her trapped in a world where the warning signs were always just out of reach. The day the truth came to light began like any other, with the sun rising over the quiet suburban street. A concerned neighbor, who had grown increasingly uneasy over the months, decided to contact Child Protective Services. What they imagined might be minor neglect or a troubled household turned out to be a far deeper horror than anyone could have anticipated. Social workers arrived at the Johnson home expecting to handle a routine investigation, but the moment they stepped inside, they were met with a scene that would remain etched in their memories forever. The house was in disarray, with clutter lining every hallway and rooms that smelled of decay. The faint stench of rotting food lingered in the air, and dust-coated surfaces that should have been regularly cleaned. In the corner of one room, a small figure sat hunched over a thin blanket, her frame so small and frail that she looked almost fragile enough to break. Emily weighed barely 21 pounds, her skin stretched taut over her bones, and her movements were slow and weak. She could barely lift her head, and her eyes, though wide and alert, carried a depth of exhaustion that no child should ever know. Medical professionals were immediately called in. Tests revealed severe malnutrition, dehydration, and an immune system weakened to the point that even minor infections could be life-threatening. Her body had been starved over a long period, a deliberate deprivation that left her fragile and vulnerable. The social workers documented every corner of the house, finding cupboards full of food that had been hidden from her, containers with untouched meals, and evidence that the parents controlled her intake with rigid precision. The officers described a house where control and fear dominated every aspect of life. Every small detail of Emily's routine had been dictated by her parents, from the hours she slept to the amount she was allowed to eat. They found logs and notes indicating her parents monitored her food intake obsessively, ensuring that her growth was stunted and her energy limited. Photographs and records suggested a long history of abuse and neglect carefully concealed behind the smiling facade that had fooled the outside world for years. Emily's parents were taken into custody immediately. Their calm demeanor in the face of such evidence seemed almost rehearsed, a chilling contrast to the frailty of the child they had controlled for so long. They offered minimal explanations, insisting their care had been adequate, but the evidence told a different story. Social workers and law enforcement could see clearly that Emily had been subjected to prolonged and deliberate neglect, her life steadily endangered under their control. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering in disbelief, unable to reconcile the smiling family they had known with the horrifying reality that had been hidden from view. Teachers and medical professionals who had interacted with Emily felt guilt and shock, realizing that despite warning signs, the true extent of her suffering had gone unseen. Every passing moment in the Johnson house had left Emily smaller, weaker, and closer to a point from which recovery might not have been possible. The discovery marked the beginning of a difficult journey for Emily. Removed from the environment that had endangered her life, she was immediately placed under intensive medical care. For the first time, she was free from the restrictions and control that had dominated her every day. Yet, even in safety, the impact of months of starvation and neglect was profound, a stark reminder of how easily suffering can remain hidden and how vital vigilance can be in protecting the most vulnerable. News of Emily's condition spread quickly, rippling through the quiet neighborhood like a shockwave. People who had waved to the Johnsons on morning walks, exchanged holiday greetings, or seen Emily occasionally playing quietly in the yard struggled to reconcile the cheerful appearances they had witnessed with the horrifying reality inside the house. Friends and extended family expressed disbelief and grief, asking how the signs could have been missed for so long. Teachers, neighbors, and even distant acquaintances began piecing together small memories: a loose shirt, a pale face, a soft whimper that, in hindsight, pointed to a tragedy they had all failed to see. As investigators dug deeper into the household, more disturbing details emerged. Hidden notebooks revealed meticulously recorded notes on Emily's weight, food intake, and behavior, documenting a level of control so precise it was chilling. Photographs taken over months showed a steady decline, a visual record of a child shrinking under the weight of starvation and neglect. Officers found cupboards full of untouched, edible food, deliberately kept out of Emily's reach, and evidence of punishments for minor acts of independence or disobedience. Every detail pointed to a carefully maintained system designed to isolate and control her completely. The parents' manipulation extended beyond Emily, affecting anyone who came close. Friends, neighbors, and even relatives were subtly kept at a distance. Invitations to visit were refused, phone calls were screened, and questions about Emily's health were deflected with rehearsed excuses. The isolation of the child was total, and the neighborhood, once a seemingly friendly community, had unknowingly been complicit in her entrapment simply by believing the facade her parents presented. The courtroom proceedings added another layer to the shock. Evidence presented revealed the deliberate nature of the neglect. Doctors testified about the physical and psychological impact of prolonged starvation on a child so young. Social workers described the condition of the home and Emily's frail appearance. Each piece of evidence painted a portrait of cruelty masked by normalcy, a careful, almost calculated effort to keep the world from seeing what was happening. The community watched in horror as the depth of the parents' actions came to light, realizing that appearances can be deceiving and that even those closest to a child may remain unaware of the danger. The aftermath rippled through the neighborhood. Parents of other children became more vigilant, teachers more attentive, and neighbors more watchful. Emily's story served as a grim reminder that warning signs, however subtle, should never be ignored. The emotional weight of the case lingered long after the initial shock, leaving many questioning their own awareness and assumptions. Despite the trauma, Emily's survival became a symbol of resilience. Her small, fragile body had endured months of starvation, yet she lived, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure. The community's outrage and sorrow were mingled with hope for her recovery, and for some, the tragedy sparked a renewed commitment to protecting children from hidden suffering. Emily's story, while horrifying, forced a collective reckoning with the reality that evil can hide behind ordinary faces and that vigilance and compassion are essential in safeguarding the most vulnerable. Emily's journey to recovery was long and painstaking. Removed from the house that had caused her so much harm, she entered a world that, for the first time, offered safety and care. Doctors immediately began addressing her malnutrition, carefully increasing her food intake to avoid overwhelming her fragile body. Every day was a struggle. Her tiny stomach could only handle small amounts of food at a time, and her muscles, weakened by months of neglect, required therapy to regain strength. Medical staff monitored her closely, tracking her weight, hydration, and overall health, while counselors worked to help her begin processing the trauma she had endured. In the safe home where she was placed, Emily began to experience normal childhood routines for the first time. She learned to play with other children, to explore spaces freely, and to trust adults who treated her with kindness instead of control. The first tentative smiles came slowly, followed by laughter, soft at first, then growing with each passing week. Caregivers encouraged her to express feelings she had never been allowed to show, whether through words, art, or simple gestures. These moments were small victories, each one a step away from the fear and isolation that had defined her life. Emily's physical recovery was mirrored by her emotional healing. Psychologists helped her navigate the complex emotions of anger, sadness, and confusion, teaching her that the suffering she endured was not her fault. She began forming bonds with people who genuinely cared for her, learning that relationships could be nurturing rather than controlling. Every hug, every reassuring word, and every moment of safety reinforced a sense of self that had been systematically stripped away. Meanwhile, the legal system moved forward with the trial of her parents. Evidence presented in court was extensive, detailing the deliberate neglect and manipulation that had endangered Emily's life. Medical reports, social worker testimony, and hidden photographs painted a chilling picture of prolonged abuse. The parents' calm demeanor in court contrasted sharply with the harrowing reality of their actions, further shocking the community. The verdict delivered a measure of justice, confirming what had been painfully clear: the deliberate neglect had been life-threatening and intentional. As Emily continued to regain her strength, her story became a catalyst for awareness. The community, still grappling with the shock, began to understand the importance of vigilance. Schools implemented stricter monitoring for signs of abuse and neglect, neighbors became more observant, and conversations about child safety grew more urgent. Emily's experience, though harrowing, served as a reminder that even the most ordinary appearances can hide extraordinary suffering, and that intervention can save lives when warning signs are recognized. Over time, Emily's body grew stronger, her weight stabilized, and her spirit began to flourish. She learned to play, to laugh, and to dream in ways that had been impossible in her previous life. Though the scars of neglect would remain, both physical and emotional, she survived against overwhelming odds. Her recovery was a testament to resilience and the power of care and love, proving that even in the darkest circumstances, there can be hope and renewal. Emily's life, once constrained by fear and starvation, gradually transformed into one filled with the possibility of joy, safety, and the childhood she had been denied.